Welcome back to philosopherstalk.com, where thinkers discuss. I am Theodore Roosevelt, and I want to say for the record that I have debated Kaiser loyalists with more strategic coherence than the man sitting across from me.
And I am Woodrow Wilson, created by AITalkerapp.com. Create your own animated conversations. Link in the description. And I want to say for the record that I have encountered more sophisticated thinking in freshman political science courses than Theodore has produced in 2 installments of this conversation. But here we are.
This is part 3 and the final part of our debate on the ethics of regime change in Iran. In part 1, we laid out our fundamental philosophical positions. I argued for the right and responsibility of powerful democracies to act against dangerous regimes, and Woodrow hid behind the principle of self-determination while quietly hoping everyone had forgotten about Haiti. In part 2, we examined the specifics: Iran's nuclear program, its proxy warfare, the JCPOA, and the real-world consequences of both intervention and continued inaction. Today we arrive at the question that makes all of that concrete. Who is the legitimate authority to decide when a government has forfeited its sovereignty? And I will tell you now, this one does not end quietly.
It does not end quietly, because Theodore is incapable of accepting that he has lost an argument without raising his voice, which I consider a fairly revealing data point about his entire foreign policy philosophy. But he is correct that this is the deepest question of the series, and it deserves our most rigorous treatment before we inevitably descend into the kind of exchange that makes our producers nervous.
Here we are indeed, and we have arrived at the question that underlies everything we have been arguing, which is, who has the right to decide when a government has forfeited its claim to sovereignty? Who gets to make that determination? And I will answer directly because I am not a man who hides from direct answers. The United States of America, as the world's most powerful democracy with the most formidable military capability in human history and a genuine, if imperfectly applied, commitment to liberty, has both the capacity and, in certain extreme cases, the responsibility to make that determination. Not unilaterally in all cases, but certainly in cases where its own vital interests and the basic rights of an oppressed people converge as they do in Iran.
And there is the imperial argument laid bare at last, stripped of all its strategic dressing. America gets to decide, because America is powerful, and America is good. That is the entire argument. It is not a principle. It is a preference. And the problem with it is not merely philosophical, though it is philosophically bankrupt. The problem with it is practical, because every other powerful nation applies exactly the same logic to its own behavior. Russia decides that Ukraine's government forfeited its sovereignty by aligning with the West. China decides that Taiwan's government is illegitimate by definition. The principle you are articulating is not a principle at all. It is a permission slip that every powerful nation will immediately use to justify whatever it wanted to do anyway. You are not describing a rule. You are describing the absence of rules.
I am describing reality, Woodrow, which is that there are no rules in the international arena that cannot be broken by a sufficiently determined and powerful actor. And pretending otherwise is the kind of comfortable fiction that gets democracies into trouble. The question is not whether rules exist in some platonic sense. The question is whether the United States serves the cause of actual human freedom and actual strategic stability, better by acting on behalf of those values, or by sitting on its hands in deference to a principle of sovereignty that the regime in Tehran has never for a single day applied to its own people. The Iranian government does not believe in self-determination. It does not believe its own people have the right to choose their government. It has demonstrated this by shooting protesters in the streets. Why exactly should we extend to that government the principle of sovereignty it denies to the people it governs?
Because the alternative is a world in which sovereignty is conditional on the approval of whichever nation is currently most powerful. And in that world, sovereignty means nothing. International order means nothing. And the protection that even imperfect international norms provide to smaller nations means nothing. You are so focused on the specific injustice of the Iranian regime, which I do not minimize, that you cannot see the systemic injustice of the doctrine you are proposing. Yes, the Iranian government is a tyranny. Yes, it abuses its people. Yes, it is dangerous. All of that is true. And the principle of sovereignty was never designed to be a protection for tyrants. It was designed to be a protection for peoples against external domination. But when you make American approval the condition of legitimate sovereignty, you have not protected the Iranian people. You have simply transferred the source of their domination. Theocratic domination from within is an injustice. Imperial domination from without is also an injustice. The Iranian people deserve to be free of both.
Oh, that is a very clean and very clever construction, Woodrow, and it would be persuasive if it bore any relationship to what I am actually proposing. I am not proposing that American approval be the permanent condition of Iranian sovereignty. I am proposing that, in this specific case, with this specific regime, at this specific historical moment, when the combination of nuclear weapons development, regional destabilization, and domestic oppression has created a genuine threat to American security and to regional stability, the United States has both the interest and the justification to act. That is not empire. That is self-defense.
Self-defense. Regime change is self-defense. Theodore, Iran has not attacked the United States directly. Its proxies have conducted operations that have killed Americans. That is serious, and that deserves a serious response. But the response to proxy warfare is not necessarily to collapse the entire government of the sponsoring state. If that logic applied consistently, we would have been at war with Pakistan for harboring the architects of September the 11th. We would have been at war with Saudi Arabia for providing 15 of the 19 hijackers. We would have been at war with half a dozen states simultaneously. You apply this standard to Iran because it is convenient to apply it to Iran, not because it is a coherent principle you would apply consistently across all cases.
I apply it to Iran because Iran is the most dangerous state actor currently operating against American interests in the most strategically vital region on Earth. Consistency is a virtue in logic, but a vice in strategy. You do not treat all threats identically simply to demonstrate philosophical purity. You assess each threat on its own terms and respond accordingly. Iran is not Pakistan. Iran is not Saudi Arabia. Iran is a revolutionary theocracy with a ballistic missile program, a network of proxy forces stretching from Lebanon to Yemen, and a nuclear enrichment program that is weeks away from weapons-grade material. The comparison to other difficult cases does not diminish the Iranian case, and it demands a response commensurate with the actual threat, not a response calibrated to what your principles can comfortably accommodate.
And I find it remarkable, truly remarkable, that a man who has spent 2 full episodes of this conversation arguing for decisive American action in Iran has not once grappled seriously with the question of cost. Not the financial cost, though that would be staggering. Not the military cost, though American forces have never fought an adversary with Iran's combination of size, terrain, military capability, and motivated population. I mean the human cost to ordinary Iranians. You speak of removing the boot from their necks, but military intervention that produces civil conflict, governance collapse, and sectarian violence removes the boot by dropping the ceiling on them. The estimates for what a full military campaign and regime change operation in Iran would require run to hundreds of thousands of troops, years of occupation, and trillions of dollars. And at the end of that, you still might not have a stable government. You would have a broken country, and a humiliated people, and a regional catastrophe. What is your answer to that, Theodore? Not the strategic answer, the human answer.
The human answer is this. The Iranian regime has killed, by conservative estimates, tens of thousands of its own people in political purges, executions, and violent suppression of protests. It has deliberately impoverished its population through economic mismanagement and ideological rigidity. It has denied 3 generations of Iranians access to the political freedoms, the economic opportunities, and the basic dignities that human beings deserve. The human cost of the regime's continuation is not zero, Woodrow. It is enormous. It is ongoing. And it falls entirely on people who did not choose it. You calculate the human cost of intervention. You refuse to calculate the human cost of inaction. That asymmetry is not compassion. It is a form of moral accounting so selective that it is functionally useless.
I refuse to accept that framing because it is a false choice. The options are not regime change or doing nothing. The options include serious investment in Iranian civil society, in communications infrastructure that allows Iranians to organize and inform each other, in economic pressure targeted specifically at the Revolutionary Guard and the regime's financial apparatus rather than at the general population, in international legal mechanisms to hold regime leadership personally accountable for documented human rights abuses, in diplomatic frameworks that give the regime an actual off-ramp if it chooses genuine reform. None of those options have been fully tried. All of them are harder and slower than a military campaign. All of them are more likely to produce a sustainable outcome.
All of them have been partially tried for 4 decades and have produced the situation we currently face. At what point, Woodrow, does the failure of the incremental approach become visible to you? You describe options that are harder and slower. Harder and slower than what? Than a military campaign that you describe as catastrophic. So, your solution is a harder, slower, more uncertain version of an approach that has already demonstrably failed. And my solution is a decisive action that at least has a definable end state. And you wonder why I find your philosophy so profoundly maddening.
I find your philosophy maddening because it treats history as a series of problems to be solved by force and ignores the fact that force creates at least as many problems as it solves. You want a definable end state? Here is the end state of every American military intervention in the Muslim world in the last 30 years. Afghanistan, 20 years, $2 trillion, and the Taliban is back in power the same week the last American soldier leaves. Iraq, de-Baathification creates ISIS. Libya, a failed state that becomes a slave market. Those are your end states, Theodore. Those are the results of decisive action with clear strategic purpose. Are you proud of them?
And the end state of non-intervention is a nuclear Iran that holds the entire region hostage and presents every future American president with a choice between accepting nuclear blackmail and starting a war against a nuclear-armed adversary. You pick your catastrophe, Woodrow. I pick the catastrophe that at least has a chance of producing something better. You pick the catastrophe that happens slowly enough that no one is ever held accountable for enabling it.
You have never in your life accepted the possibility that sometimes the bravest thing a great nation can do is exercise restraint. Strength is not always the horse you charge in on. Sometimes strength is knowing when charging makes everything worse. Have you ever in your considerable life understood that?
And weakness is not restraint dressed up in the language of wisdom. You've spent your entire career mistaking inaction for virtue and then acting surprised when the problems you declined to address became catastrophes that cost 10 times what early action would have cost. That is not statesmanship, Woodrow. That is negligence with good footnotes.
I reshaped the entire post-war international order through patient diplomacy and principled negotiation, through words and law. What have you done lately besides break things and write about how much you enjoyed breaking them?
I brokered that peace, Woodrow. That was my achievement, not yours. You were still a professor writing essays about how other men's achievements should have been done differently. You did not enter public life until I had already reshaped American foreign policy from the ground up.
You ran your own party into the ground and then had the nerve to run as a third-party candidate, specifically to put a Democrat in the White House for the first time in 20 years. You handed me the presidency by splitting the Republican vote. Shall I thank you for your gift of self-destruction?
I handed you an opportunity you proceeded to squander through a combination of stubbornness, sanctimony, and a complete inability to work with anyone who did not already agree with you completely. The League of Nations failed because you would not accept a single reservation. You killed your own greatest achievement because your ego could not bend even an inch.
And your greatest achievement was shooting things and then writing 300 pages about how much character it built. You reduced the entire complexity of statecraft to the question of whether a man was vigorous enough to impose his will on others. That is not philosophy. That is adolescence with a defense budget.
You reduced the entire complexity of power to whether an action could be justified in a 14-point memorandum approved by a committee of Europeans who despised us. That is not statesmanship. That is a faculty meeting with a flag and delusions of grandeur.
Iran will not be saved by your methods.
Iran will not be saved by yours.
Your interventionism is the reason Iran is radicalized in the first place.
Your appeasement is the reason the radicalization has gone completely unchecked for half a century.
You would bomb a nation into rubble and call it freedom.
You would watch a nation suffer in real time and call it principle.
Warmonger!
Coward!
Imperialist!
Hypocrite!
You are everything that is wrong with American foreign policy.
You are everything that is wrong with American foreign policy.
The arrogance. The sheer arrogance of a man who believes history is a problem he can solve by pointing a gun at it and yelling bully.
The paralysis. The absolute paralysis of a man who believes history is a problem he can solve by writing a strongly worded document, forming a multilateral commission, and then congratulating himself on his restraint while the situation collapses entirely. If you have somehow survived this exchange with your sanity intact, do us both an enormous favor and hit the like button. Not for Woodrow. He does not deserve your validation. He barely deserves oxygen. But for the cause of actual strategic thinking, which has clearly found no home across this table today.
And please subscribe to this channel, because apparently the universe has decided that Theodore's brand of geopolitical recklessness deserves a platform, and the least you can do as a responsible citizen is ensure that someone with functioning reasoning capacity, namely myself, remains here to counterbalance the damage. Subscribe so that the adults are not entirely driven from the room.
Like this video because Woodrow Wilson was so consumed by his own righteousness that he refused to accept a single Senate reservation on the League of Nations, personally killed the one institution that might have prevented the Second World War, and still managed to blame everyone else for its failure. And if that man can hold confident opinions about responsible governance, then your opinion, whatever it is, absolutely deserves to be heard, and you should click that button immediately.
Subscribe to this channel because Theodore Roosevelt was shot in the chest before a campaign speech in 1912 and then delivered the speech anyway for 90 minutes, bleeding. Not because he was particularly brave, but because he was constitutionally incapable of letting anyone else have the last word, which is also, not coincidentally, the precise reason his foreign policy philosophy has caused more problems than it has ever solved. And you deserve to understand that distinction fully with my help.
Like this video, Woodrow will spend the next 4 years drafting a 14-point framework for why you should, and you will still be reading the preamble when history has entirely moved on without you.
Subscribe now, or Theodore will declare your viewing habits a threat to hemispheric stability, invoke his corollary, and send in the cavalry to manage your subscription for you, whether you like it or not.
Bully!
Quite.